Yeah, it's a subject that, we all have to deal with, but it's a tough one because a lot of us parents recognize that, even myself, there's so much central planning manipulation going on in governments and economics that most of us don't even want to send our children out into the workforce to deal with this bullshit. But at the same time, we have to recognize the fact that this constant allowing our children to postpone and put off becoming productive adults, even though it's good as far as deterring and hindering central planning governments because they don't have as big of a tax base, a tax farm to steal and plunder from, at the same time, it's going to have long-term consequences and ramifications for these younger generations, the millennials in particular, for postponing becoming adults and taking full responsibility for their lives and their actions. I think there's going to be some pretty long-term consequences and ramifications for all this central planning that has deterred and impeded young people's willingness and ability to go out and be productive members in society. I see it not just in my own family, but extended family, neighbors, friends, co-workers. We live in such a weird and fucked up time. No wonder there's so much central planning that takes place because, let's be honest, most people now are unwilling to assume the responsibility and role of being the center of their own universe and taking care of themselves and those around them. Most people now look to others, whether it's their parents, charities, governments. Most people today apparently seem to be looking for some external entity to take care of them. The religion of statism and collectivism is very well entrenched in Canada. And the younger people today don't want to assume that task, that role, that responsibility for providing for themselves and those they love and care about. Which is why government has grown so tremendously. I think Gen X, my generation, we're like that sandwich generation where we still remember and we're taught to provide for ourselves, even though the people, our parents that were telling us to be productive and provide for ourselves, even though they were speaking out both sides of their mouth, because at the same time they were using central planning governments to grow and expand their entitlements, they were trying to tell us younger people that, no, you got to be responsible and take care of yourself. So in reality, that was good because we are probably the last generation alive today that actually understands that concept. Our kids, even though people like myself, I've tried to tell my kids that, but think about it. I'm just one voice. And when you live in an era, in an atmosphere where your voice is suppressed and quieted and silenced by a majority of them, they're saying, don't worry, somebody else can take care of you. Socialism, collectivism, communism, fascism, where that's propagated to the point where, I'm just a whisper in the dark in reality. Now, for my kids, my own children, my flesh and blood, right? My own children understand this much better than most, but think about it in the macro aspect of it. How many kids today that are born are millennials? How many of them do you suppose were raised in an atmosphere while their parents were just like when I was raised, right? This wasn't economics, but I was raised in an atmosphere where my parents were saying violence is wrong. You shouldn't hurt other people. You shouldn't hit other people all the time while they were hurting and hitting me. So I at least grew up to realize that they were just lying, contradictory, bullshit motherfuckers for the most part. The kids today are the same thing. They're hearing the propaganda spewed about, being responsible and da-da-da, but they're not seeing that reality played out in their own lives. Because a lot of kids that are born today, most of their parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, or extended family members, relatives, leaders in their communities, they all rely on the state, on the mysticism of government, of central planning to be gainfully employed or benefit in some way economically. So they're seeing that same disparity, that same discrepancy, that same contradictory message presented towards them. I don't know how that's going to play out in the long run. The long run game, nobody knows how that's going to play out. But I do recognize and acknowledge that we live in a really, really, really sad time, a really sad era where, I mean, think about it. What has it been? I'm just going to read real quick. Still living with mom and dad, you're not alone. And the numbers prove it. Almost a third, 1 in 3, 18 to 34-year-olds still live at home, data shows. And actually, that was an American study. If you read down through the whole thing, in Canada, it's like 40-something%. Almost half. I mean, how fucked up is that? And I see this, like, even in my own personal subjective circumstance, where is not the end all be all, but I see it out when I'm out and around, and like I say, I'm very observant of these things, and I see it. It's so prevalent. How many of the young people today are living home, putting off raising a family, having kids, being productive members of society, and responsible for themselves? I'm seeing, and there's going to come a time right now while they're being distracted with video games or their grandparents taking care of them or whatever. That's all fun and games while they're young, but they're all going to become older people, and they're going to realize just how much you fucked them up at some stage in the game. They're going to come to realize how much their parents and their grandparents fucked them up so bad for allowing them to be just parasites and not learn to be productive members in society. Because when they're thrown out to the wolves and they have no defensive mechanisms built in or entrenched in their minds, they're like, why did you guys leave me? I'm just food for the wolves. And that's what collectivists are doing. They think they're helping their kids, but you're just creating fodder for the wolves. You're just creating feed for the wolves. For the first time in at least 130 years, young people between the age of 18 and 34 are more likely to be living at home with their parents than in any other living arrangement. According to the latest data from the U.S., 2014 marked the first time on record that has ever been recorded when the most common choice of home for young adults wasn't under their own roof with a spouse or common law partner. The Pew Research Center found that 32.1% of Americans in that age bracket were living with their parents that year, followed by, and then it says 31.6% who lived with a spouse or common law partner, 14% who lived at home alone or with roommates, or 22% who had other living arrangements such as in college dorms or with other family members. Now, let me get down to the Canadian part of it. And it's disturbing, no matter how you look at it. No matter which country you're talking about. Oh, here it is. I went too far down the article trying to read real quickly, but so here it is. But that's no longer the case, as living with mom and dad has supplanted living alone or with your sweetie. And Canadian numbers show a similar trend. While the two countries track slightly different age cohorts, according to the most recent Statistics Canada census, 42.3% of people in their 20s lived at home in 2011. That's well up from previous generations, including 32.1% in 1991 and 26.9% in 1981. So think about it. They're talking about 10-year gaps. I mean, look at from 42 to 32 to 26. I mean, it just keeps getting worse. I mean, economic fundamentals, prosperity, right? All the bullshit they try to tell you. The only thing that you have today, in reality, this is the honest, objective truth of it. They'll give you a few toys to distract you, right? So whether it's your computer, your laptop, your phone, or your television, your central plan and your overlords will give you those, even if they have to what's the word I'm looking for? Even if they have to reduce the capital costs or subsidize that, they will give you these distractive technologies so that you're not thinking about the reality that you live in. That's really what it's all about. Is they want you to be distracted from the reality that you live in. And they'll give you lots of tools and opportunities to keep your mind distracted from that reality so that hopefully they can keep continuing to gain and benefit from your indoctrination, from your mentality of subjugation, right? If you ever, and when, not if, but when you do fucking finally come to realize, a lot of you people that still promote the religion of statism, when you do finally come to realize how much you've been duped, they're hoping that by that stage of the game, it'll be too late to do anything about it. They'll be like, well, it's too late. I already enjoyed and benefit all this shit. And you guys, well, okay, you can kill me now if you want, or you can do whatever you want. But hey, I gained so much from rolling over you, stealing and plundering from your productive wealth, your future productive capacity, that it doesn't matter at this stage of the game. They're hoping that they can prolong that long enough. I think they probably have. I suppose at this stage of the game, they don't even care probably. I don't know when we reach that point. I think we're probably close to that precipice where they really don't care now, because they'll just go hiding off. Like they have all the power, the money, the influence, the control. And you gave it to them willingly, freely, because you were too stupid to stand up. You were too lazy and inept to hold them to account and to stand firm in your principal convictions, or those that you should be stand firm. You've shown them that you're losers. So they're not scared of losers. Even though they're losers themselves, they recognize that you're even worse losers. So they're not fearful of you. I mean, look at what's happening. Look at how governments are, even with the weed implementation of legalization in Canada, they're not fearful of repercussions. They'll fuck with anyone still. So they still feel in charge. You have not challenged them in any way, shape, or form, even though you try to pretend that you do. They still look at you as just their serfs, their servants. Obedient slaves and conformists. That's how they look at you. And you haven't done anything to prove them wrong. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.